Hello and welcome to the Sunday Standard News Review. This week we are looking at the speech by President Masisi wherein he talked about big issues facing the nation, chief of which was the COVID pandemic. My name is Spencer Mogapi, and joining me to discuss this issue further is the business editor of both the Sunday Standard and the Telegraph newspapers, Victor Baatweng. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you very much, Spencer.
The much-awaited speech by President Masisi has come and gone. What do you make of the speech by the President, Victor?
Thank you very much, Spencer. I think the speech has created anxiety for the nation for the past 3-4 days before it was delivered, ever since it was announced that the President is going to speak to the nation. It's unfortunate that the announcement was not as clear in terms of what he was going to speak about, which explains the anxiety anyway. And but obviously in the media industry we had an idea that he might speak to the reset agenda, because you would recall, Spencer, that in May when he announced the reset agenda, he had made a promise that he will make a monthly address or monthly update in terms of this agenda. So we had expected that to happen in June. In fact, the President himself did apologize to the nation yesterday for his failure to deliver the update in June. He has actually now moved the update to 2 months. He said he will now make the updates in every 2 months.
Let's talk now about the speech itself. What did you make as the most salient announcements from the speech, the ones that we had not expected at all? But what were the big points that you made from the speech, Victor?
Yeah, the big takeaway was the announcement of the closure of schools. That's the one that a lot of people have been calling the government to do that. I wouldn't say it was a shock, but that is the biggest announcement that was made. Also, the other one was that there was speculation, people thinking there could be hard national lockdown, and that was one of the surprises or one of the shocks when the President did announce that there won't be any lockdown. So those were the two key things that were there. Obviously others, like the ban on sale of liquor, the President was just passing through to say it's on place. People had not expected much of change in that regard.
And in passing also, the President touched on the unrest in South Africa and how they could affect the economy. He talked about fuel, but also food security. How big is that as an announcement coming from the President?
Yeah, it's big. It's enough to cushion the nation. But one would have loved for the President to say what his government is going to do about it. For the longest time, you'd remember, Spencer, that as a nation we've been talking about this issue of food security and our import bill being over 90% or so. So one would have loved the President to go a bit further and say what the government would do, particularly with the interest on the food production part of it, the agro-processing. If you recall very well, last year in July, the Citizen Economic Development Agency, Entrepreneurship Development Agency, CEDA, revised the guidelines, stubborn, and part of the announcement that came was that they would focus on agro-processing projects. One would have loved to say between July last year and this year, how many of those projects have been financed and at what level are they, because obviously they would be work in progress to address this issue of food security.
Just a second here, Victor. I thought I heard him talk about ministries, each ministry undertaking a process of some review. He talked about the clusters. Basically, it's work in progress from what I understand. What did you make of that?
I don't think he gave enough information on that. We need, at least from where we stand, we need the kind of information that tells us that, for instance, we have a factory in Molepole or in Tonota or in Bobonong that is putting up tomato sauces, or we have a factory in Rekops that is putting up toothpick. Some of the basic commodities or basic household things that we import from South Africa. Remember, we are speaking about this because you had mentioned the issue in the President talking about on the supply from South Africa being affected. So by now we could be at a point where some of these factories are already being built. But as it stands, no one knows what is happening in terms of our improving of food security, except a few bans. Obviously, the past week we have seen the government imposing a ban on the importation of some snacks made out of maize. But even that, we do it without necessarily saying, have we built capacity within our people, within our companies?
We have since seen a few announcements, especially from some hospitals, making it clear that the unrest in South Africa have really affected their logistics and the supplies. How big do you think this is going to be in the next few weeks unless it improves in South Africa?
Yeah, I think it's a worrisome development in our neighboring country. What is happening there is one of the issues that one would have loved the president to go a bit further in terms of explaining to the nation what we are likely to face. Because already you have seen private hospitals and private clinics turning people back who were supposed to be hospitalized because of shortage of bed. But it's not just shortage of bedding, it's also shortage of likely shortage of oxygen in some of these hospitals. Remember this COVID-19, as most of the patients, they need support, the oxygen machines. So there's also disruption in terms of supply from South Africa, oxygen. So it will depend on how much we have in store now, and also whether the situation in South Africa would worsen or at least be controlled.
Let's talk about the president's reset agenda. He announced that he will be introducing the position of chief of staff. What do you foresee that position in government or in his private office basically doing, and what will be its relationship, for example, to the permanent secretary to the president?
From the small explanation that is contained in this president's speech is that it will improve the relation between his private office and the public. I don't know what he means by that. And I'm worried that if I'm in the sector that's supposed to know a bit of things, how about the members of the public? And that's one thing about the president's speech from yesterday. It was some of the things that he said were really confusing, and they would need some sort of follow-up. Obviously, it's a follow-up that we can do here at the newspaper, but for the members of the public, there are a lot of things that the president said that are likely to be confusing because the speech was really all over. The structure was not as the usual one that we are used to.
And of course, for many, the biggest priority remains vaccine. And the president, in his many announcements in the speech, he said they foresaw as a government that vaccination will be complete by 2022, end of that year. How realistic is that, at least given what we now know as the pace of the vaccine continuing forward?
Yeah, the Sunday Standard, if you remember, the Sunday Standard newspaper ran a story some time back to say Botswana would be vaccinated in 2023. That's exactly where we are going. And what the president said yesterday is actually proving the story to be correct. And one of the unfortunate things that the president said yesterday was to try and classify some of these vaccines to say the Moderna is Mokento wa Popota, meaning that is of higher quality to others. And it could leave some people worried who have already used other vaccine to say, if the president is saying the other vaccine is superior to the others, people could start shunning other form of vaccines. So it's one of those things that the speechwriters could have made sure that it's not part of the speech.
But still, whatever the president let through gives you the thinking behind the scenes of what government is going through with vaccine. When he said one vaccine, basically it means that the government might be aware that some people will not be on or choosing one vaccine over the other, or might opt over. Basically, we are talking about hesitancy here, vaccine hesitancy.
Yeah, and that is why it's very important that whatever the president say do not cause some form of confusion to the nation. And whatever he says, the speechwriters have to be very careful to ensure that it comes out clearer. Because at the end of the day, he wants to inspire confidence in the nation. He wants to inspire trust between his government and the people. And the least thing that he wants is to lose trust from the people, because that's when the troubles will begin.
And lastly, Victor, what would you say would be the response towards the next speech, the public response towards the next speech by the president? Do you think people will be looking forward to it after what happened last night? Or?
halfway through the speech, if you had gone through social media, you'd realize that people were already showing some sort of discontentment towards the speech. And chances are that the next updates, they would not be as interesting, or they would not cause as much anxiety as this one or the past one. And this is a trend that we are also seeing even before COVID, where people were losing interest in State of the Nation address and the national budget, mainly because some of these speeches, they don't speak directly to the people. People feel that they are not part of the agenda at all. So it's very important that every time a speech like this is delivered, the deliverer of the speech, for instance, yesterday it was the president, speaks to the problem and then also goes further and provide expertise or solution to what they are speaking about.
Thank you very much, Victor. And that's all we had time for. Until we meet again next week.